Have you ever wondered why a man can withstand a woman's rage, her fury, even her heartbreak, but crumbles under her silence? It is because silence is not the absence of words. It is the presence of something far more terrifying to the male ego: indifference. When a woman goes silent, truly silent, not out of fear, not out of manipulation, but from a place of inner knowing, she becomes an enigma the masculine psyche cannot decode. She becomes the shadow that he projected onto her, now returned to him, unanswered. You see, most men have been conditioned to measure their worth through validation, performance, and conquest. They are trained to respond to resistance, to rise when challenged, to fix what's broken when the noise is loud. But when the woman offers nothing, no blame, no begging, no closure, something ancient and primitive inside him begins to fracture. Her silence isn't passive, it is archetypal. It is the deep feminine withdrawing her energy, her essence, her reflection, and leaving him to face his own. Carl Jung taught that the feminine, the anima, is the mirror through which man sees the parts of himself he cannot access alone. She is not his possession. She is the gateway to his soul. When she retreats, he loses more than a partner. He loses his psychic compass. The silence becomes a void, and the void demands reckoning. She may have once explained her pain, her needs, her dreams, over and over again. But each explanation chipped away at her own self-worth. Each repetition a wound to her soul. She thought if she just articulated herself better, more lovingly, more calmly, maybe then he would see. But he wasn't listening, not truly, because her words were still about him, how he hurt her, how he could change, how he could become the man she knew was buried under his own unconscious debris. But silence, that is about her. It is her stepping outside the game. It is the sovereign act of reclaiming energy she once gave away too freely. It is the moment she stops trying to be understood and starts becoming whole. And that is what tears through the masculine illusion of control. You, the woman who has gone quiet, you are not weak. You are not cold. You are not cruel. You are finally listening to your inner voice. The one that was drowned out by the noise of pleasing, fixing, hoping. You are no longer the projection screen for his unresolved mother wounds, his ego needs, his fears of inadequacy. You have ceased to be his mirror, and that terrifies him, because now he must face the real one, the shadow, the part of himself he always avoided, always blamed on others, always denied. The silence you offer is sacred because it is the first time you no longer carry his pain for him. You've placed it back in his hands, not out of spite, but out of necessity. You can no longer be the container for a man who refuses to contain himself. And somewhere, deep in his subconscious, he knows. He feels the absence not as rejection, but as exposure. Without your voice, without your emotional labor, without your attempts to make it work, he is left with only himself. And for many men, that is a wilderness they have never learned to walk. He may call you cold, distant, difficult. He may try to provoke you back into your old patterns through guilt, through charm, through rage. But don't confuse that for love. It is simply the ego, desperate to avoid dissolution. Your silence isn't hurting him. It's hurting his illusion of who he thought he was with you in orbit. He never truly knew you. He only knew the version of you that served his comfort. Now with your silence, you've become something else entirely, a sovereign woman. Not a damsel, not a savior, not an emotional caretaker, but a mystery, a force, a question he cannot answer with logic, seduction, or dominance. And that's what makes you unforgettable. Not because you chased, explained, or cried, but because you didn't. You became the silence that echoed louder than any words ever could. There is a moment, subtle, imperceptible to the world, when a woman detaches not from anger, but from clarity. It is the quiet severing of an invisible thread, and the man who once believed her love was eternal suddenly finds himself wandering in the ruins of what he never truly saw. The silence isn't punishment, It is prophecy. It is the final act of a woman who has outgrown her own longing. For too long, she twisted herself into softness, into understanding, into second chances. Not because she was weak, but because her love was vast. She gave him language for emotions he couldn't name. She read between the lines of his silence, filled in the blanks of his avoidance, carried the weight of his unspoken sorrow. She became fluent in his wounds. But when her silence arrives, it is not a lapse. It is fluency in her own worth. To the unawakened man, this silence feels cruel, even dangerous. He is not afraid of her voice. He is afraid of no longer being needed by it. Her detachment confronts the part of him that measures masculinity through dominance, through utility, through being desired. When she no longer orbits him, his gravity collapses. Carl Jung warned that the ego would resist transformation at all costs, and nothing threatens the male ego like a woman who has nothing left to prove. What happens inside a man when the woman he took for granted suddenly stops explaining herself? Something shatters, not in front of others, not even in conscious awareness, but in the lonely moments. The car rides home, the sleepless 3 a.m.s, the scent of her still clinging to an old shirt. He feels it, a tug in the soul, a hollow he cannot fill with distractions or replacement. Because deep down he knows, she didn't leave because she stopped loving him. She left because she finally started loving herself. And that kind of loss haunts a man far longer than rage or betrayal. You, woman of silence, have done what few dare to do. You have walked away without burning the bridge or begging to stay. You did not throw your pain like daggers. You let it dissolve in your own stillness. And in doing so, you became untouchable. Not untouchable like ice, untouchable like fire. To approach you now is to face the heat of his own unconscious. The lies he told himself about who he was, about how much time he thought he had, about your love being unshakable. Your absence becomes alchemical. It begins to work on him in stages. First, denial, the belief that you'll return, that this is another phase. Then anger. How dare you be fine without him? Then bargaining. Perhaps a message, a memory, a breadcrumb trail to pull you back in. And when all of that fails, reflection, real reflection. But only if he chooses the path of individuation, the sacred descent Jung spoke of, the hero's journey into the underworld of self. Because only when he confronts the shadow, the part of him that ignored you, controlled you, diminished you, will he begin to see you not as a woman who left, but as a mirror that refused to distort itself any longer. And this is where the masculine either transforms or repeats. Some men will run to other women, to distractions, to egoic pursuits, but others, the ones brave enough to bleed, will descend. They will sit in the void your silence created and ask the terrifying question, who am I without her gaze? That question is the gateway to humility, to healing, to self-knowledge. And you are no longer responsible for the answer. You are not a rehabilitation center for unawakened men. You are not the translator of trauma that isn't yours. You are not the echo chamber for a man's half-truths and almost love. Your silence is sacred. It is the sound of the feminine returning to herself. It is the wind that follows a woman who has stopped waiting to be heard and started listening to the deep, ancient wisdom within. And as he sits alone, rewinding memories like old film, he will feel something tighten in his chest. Not because you hurt him, but because you healed yourself without needing his permission. That is the sound that hits the ego hardest. The echo of a woman who no longer speaks, yet says everything in her absence. There is a sacred kind of rage that never gets expressed through shouting, only through stillness. That's the kind of rage born from clarity, and it lives quietly in the woman who no longer explains herself. This woman, once overflowing with words, carefully chosen, emotionally attuned, endlessly patient, has stepped away from the performance of being understood. Her silence is not the absence of love. It is the death of self-betrayal. It is the quiet revolution that follows years of trying to be soft in a world that only respected silence as power. When she stops speaking, she doesn't vanish. she expands. She becomes the vast, unknowable feminine force that Jung described. The dark soil in which the masculine either roots or withers. She is no longer the nurturer of fragile egos. She has become the threshold. And the man left behind? He now feels that silence not as distance, but as judgment. Not the kind that condemns with fire, but the kind that reveals without mercy. He hears it in his own voice when no one's listening. He feels it in the echo chamber of his mind, that space where her words used to live. Her silence now speaks through everything she no longer does. She doesn't text. She doesn't check in. She doesn't argue. She doesn't ask. And this void where her voice once softened his rough edges, becomes unbearable, because men are rarely taught to sit in the discomfort of being misunderstood. They are taught to fix, to conquer, to win back. But how do you win silence? How do you respond to something that offers no opening? The man begins to realize that what she took with her wasn't just her presence. It was the mirror, the reflection that made him feel seen, masculine, wanted. And now he has to face his own reflection, without distortion. The feminine in her has withdrawn not out of cruelty, but out of self-respect. She no longer dances in conversations where her truth must be diluted to be digestible. She no longer bleeds for men who mistake her empathy for obligation. Her silence is clean, pure, untouchable, and this terrifies him. Not because she's gone, but because she meant it this time. It's the finality that chokes him. The unmistakable energy of a woman who has returned to herself and closed the door, not in anger, but in peace. He can feel that peace, and it slices through him like a blade, because no part of him can pretend she's doing it for attention. She's not coming back, not as a lover, not as a fixer, not as a therapist dressed in lingerie. She's done. And in her doneness, she becomes unforgettable. The world doesn't teach women the power of silence. It teaches them to soothe, to explain, to over-communicate. But there comes a moment when a woman has spoken her truth in 100 ways and still remains unseen, when silence becomes her only language. It is in that silence that she reclaims her divinity. The goddess archetype doesn't scream, she doesn't beg, she doesn't chase, she simply exists, radiant, self-possessed, sovereign. And those who cannot meet her there dissolve. This is where the masculine is called either to rise or to be left behind. A conscious man, if he dares, will enter the underworld of his own psyche. He will feel the sting of her absence, not as a punishment, but as a call to evolve. He may remember every moment he dismissed her intuition, every time he made her feel like she was too much, too emotional, too intense, and it will haunt him. Not because she cursed him, but because she healed without him. Her silence becomes a ghost, not the kind that vanishes, but the kind that lingers. In the way a certain song hits unexpectedly, in the way no other woman feels quite as alive, in the space where her voice used to echo, and now there is only him. He may reach out, and she may smile, but her silence taught her something he cannot unteach. She is no longer waiting to be chosen, because she chose herself. When a woman chooses silence, she is no longer playing the game of being liked. She is practicing the art of being free. It is the most unsettling transformation a man can witness, because her stillness exposes what his dominance could never conquer, her autonomy. She used to reach for him in moments of uncertainty, needing his reassurance like oxygen. Now her detachment is quiet oxygen, invisible, essential, but not his to give. She has entered the realm of the inner feminine, the part Jung called the self, the wholeness that exists beneath all personas, beyond all performances. It is where she stops being the woman he loves and becomes the woman he cannot define. And nothing frightens a man more than a woman he cannot define. Her silence dismantles his assumptions. He thought her love was boundless, that her loyalty was eternal, that no matter how far he drifted into indifference, she would remain. But now her energy no longer flows toward him. She does not chase, nor confront, nor linger. She simply withdraws her light. And in that withdrawal, he begins to feel what she once felt, the emptiness of trying to connect with someone who is no longer emotionally available. This is poetic justice of the soul. She mirrors back to him his own neglect, not through vengeance, but through absence. Her silence becomes a psychological reversal, a mirror through which he now experiences the hunger he once ignored. He scrolls through her photos, revisiting every smile that used to belong to him. He replays their conversations, suddenly seeing how much she once carried, how many times she held space for his chaos, how many times she softened her truth to protect his comfort. Now there is no one left to absorb his storms. He must face them himself. And the storms are brutal, because when a man loses the emotional mirror that once soothed his ego, his inner child begins to scream. Jung called this the confrontation with the shadow, the parts of the psyche buried beneath pride and pretense. Her silence awakens those shadows. Every insecurity, every fear of inadequacy, every unhealed wound from the mother he never understood, all rise to the surface, demanding to be seen. Her silence is not cruelty, it is initiation. It invites him to meet himself, not as the man he performs to be, but as the man he truly is when stripped of attention, control, and comfort. And yet, not every man will answer that call. Some will rush to fill the void she left with noise. New women, new pursuits, new distractions. They will tell themselves they are fine, that she was too complicated, too distant, too demanding. But their hearts will know otherwise, because late at night, in the soft collapse of false confidence, they will hear the echo of her silence. And that echo is not emptiness, it is reflection. For the awakened woman, this silence is not merely an ending, it is alchemy. It transforms her from emotional caretaker to sovereign creator. She stops negotiating her worth in conversations that never saw her. She stops performing patience for men addicted to avoidance. She steps into solitude not as exile, but as initiation. There she learns that peace is not the absence of love, it is the presence of self-respect. And slowly something shifts inside her. She no longer craves his apology, his closure, his realization. She no longer waits for him to understand what she meant, what she gave, what she lost. She simply breathes. She reclaims her energy from the endless spiral of proving her value. This is the rebirth of the feminine. It is the moment she understands that her silence was never about him. It was about coming home. The world around her may not notice the transformation at first. She may still look like the same woman, same eyes, same voice, same quiet smile. But within, there is a new frequency, a stillness that hums with untouchable strength. She has stopped trying to be chosen by others and started being chosen by her own soul. And that more than any word she could speak becomes her greatest power. Because when a woman learns to live in her own silence, not as absence but as presence, she becomes something beyond desire. She becomes destiny. There is a kind of silence that doesn't end relationships. It transcends them. It's the kind that turns pain into wisdom and longing into light. That's the silence she carries now. For a long time, she had confused love with labor, believing that the more she explained, the more she gave, the more she endured, the more worthy she would become. But now she understands what Jung meant when he said, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate." She used to call it fate, meeting the same kind of man, repeating the same emotional patterns, always ending in exhaustion. But her silence, that was the moment she saw the pattern and refused to play it again. She saw how her own empathy had been weaponized, how her light had been treated like a resource rather than a soul. And instead of shouting, she simply stopped offering what was never reciprocated. This silence is sacred because it is born not from bitterness, but awakening. To the untrained eye, she might look detached, but within her something divine is blooming. She has entered the realm of individuation, the Jungian process of becoming whole, where the soul integrates its lost parts. She is no longer trying to be the good woman, the understanding partner, the healer of broken men. Those roles were masks, and she has outgrown them. Now her energy is no longer scattered in the pursuit of validation. It returns home, into her art, her solitude, her body, her breath. She no longer measures her worth by whether or not she is chosen, desired, remembered. She has remembered herself. Meanwhile, somewhere in the echo of her silence, he begins to realize something painful. Her absence isn't empty, it's full. Full of everything he ignored, full of meaning he never saw, full of love he never understood. He may try to return, not because he has changed, but because he misses the reflection she once offered. He misses the safety of her understanding, the way she made his chaos seem noble. But when he looks into her eyes now, he finds no mirror there. Only depth, only calm, only the quiet knowing of a woman who no longer confuses compassion with captivity. This is where many men falter. They want the woman's warmth without her boundaries, her intuition without her silence, her love without her sovereignty. But the awakened feminine cannot be loved halfway. She has become the archetype of the sacred feminine. Untamed, tender, terrifyingly serene. In her presence, everything false dissolves. The ego cannot perform here, it can only surrender. She speaks less now, but everything about her presence says more. Her posture, her gaze, her breath, all of it communicates a truth no man can unhear once he's encountered it. She no longer belongs to his world of approval and control. She belongs to herself. And that, paradoxically, is what makes her magnetic again. Not because she's chasing love, but because she's aligned with it. Men sense this energy even if they can't name it. The unhealed will feel threatened by it. The awakened will feel called toward it. Because her silence is not a wall, it is a mirror that reflects back the truth of who they are. She has become, in Jungian terms, the self, the union of shadow and light, chaos and peace, longing and letting go. In her, the opposites reconcile, and because she is no longer defined by who sees her, she becomes visible in ways she never was before. No longer explaining, no longer persuading, no longer dimming, just being. And this being is the most potent form of communication she has ever known. It is what Carl Jung might have called the manifestation of the divine feminine consciousness. The woman who has integrated her shadow and stepped into her own myth. When she walks away, it is not to escape him. It is to meet herself. And in doing so, she doesn't just change the dynamic between them, she changes the frequency of love itself. Because the feminine that refuses to be diminished teaches the masculine what true power looks like. Not dominance, not silence as punishment, but silence as truth. She is no longer the echo of his voice, she is the sound of her own soul. There is a final kind of silence, not the one used to protect or to punish, but the one that emerges when a woman becomes complete unto herself. It is not a tactic, it is not a phase, it is the state of becoming untethered. Untethered from old stories, from the need to be understood by those who only ever wanted parts of her, from the ancient ache of trying to earn love that should have been freely given. Her silence now is the language of transcendence. It doesn't shout her worth, it breathes it. And if he hears it, really hears it, it is because something inside him has finally gone still enough to listen. Carl Jung believed the anima, the feminine within the male psyche, was not a romantic ideal, but a sacred force meant to awaken a man's soul. Yet most men never meet her, not truly. They fall in love with a woman's body, with her kindness, with the reflection she offers them. But to encounter a woman in her full self, in the silence of her knowing, the fire of her boundaries, the grace of her withdrawal, is to meet the divine within her. And that meeting requires surrender. A man cannot control her, fix her, mold her into comfort. He must enter her space the way one enters a temple, not with expectation, but with reverence, not with ego, but with awe. But few ever do, because to witness her silence is to witness the failure of his own unconscious, the parts of himself that once believed she would always be there, and now she's not because she's angry, but because she's awake. And in that awakening, her absence becomes more powerful than her presence ever was. You see, this isn't just a story about two people. It's the story of a feminine soul reclaiming her mythology. She is no longer the muse, the fixer, the second chapter in a man's unfinished story. She is the author now, and her silence is the blank page before the next great chapter, one written not in pain, but in power. She no longer lives in emotional negotiations. Her peace is not up for discussion. Her boundaries are not on trial. She doesn't need to explain why she stopped speaking, because what needed to be said has already been spoken. With her departure, the men who lose her now may call her difficult, too independent, too distant, but they will never forget her. Because once a man has met a woman who carries herself like a secret the world cannot decode, he is haunted, not by her memory, but by who he could have become in her presence. And that is the true echo of her silence. It leaves behind a blueprint, not of codependency, but of potential, not of pain, but of what was possible if only he had listened sooner, if only he had valued her words before they ran out, if only he had seen her before she became invisible in his world. But now in the world she has created for herself, she is radiant, not because she is desired, but because she is devoted to her growth, her peace, her becoming. And when she speaks again, if she speaks again, it will not be to explain herself. It will not be to mend what was broken. It will not be to reattach to what she outgrew. It will be to sing the song of a woman reborn, a woman who no longer waits for apologies, a woman who no longer entertains confusion, a woman who no longer tolerates emotional starvation masked as romance. She doesn't speak from wounds now. She speaks from wisdom. She doesn't ask to be heard. She chooses where her voice belongs. And if you're lucky enough to hear her again, you'll know this time, you are standing in the presence of someone who has made peace with being misunderstood. Because the woman who knows her worth doesn't chase, she chooses.